My phone rang at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I almost didn't answer it. I was elbow deep in flour, trying to perfect my grandmother's apple pie recipe for the 100th time, when Marcus's name flashed across my cracked screen. Something in my chest tightened. He never called during work hours anymore. Before I dive into this story, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let me know. I love connecting with people from all over the world. And if you're someone who believes that karma always finds a way, you're going to want to stick around for this one. Make sure to check the description box below for more incredible stories of justice served cold. We're leaving tomorrow, love. Your inherited house has already been sold. Bye. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, flour coating my hands, my grandmother's mixing bowl forgotten on the counter, trying to process what my husband of 7 years had just said. The casual way he said love, like it was just another Tuesday conversation about picking up milk from the store. Wait, what do you mean? But the line was already dead. My hands were shaking as I called him back. Straight to voicemail. Again. Each beep felt like a nail being hammered into the coffin of my marriage, my life, everything I thought I knew about the man I'd shared my bed with for nearly a decade. The house. My grandmother's house. The Victorian beauty on Maple Street that had been in my family for 4 generations. The house where I'd spent every summer as a child, learning to bake in the very kitchen where I now stood. The house my grandmother Clara had left specifically to me in her will, with explicit instructions that it should never leave the family. I sank into one of the mismatched kitchen chairs, the same ones Grandma Clara had painted bright yellow in 1987, claiming they brought sunshine into any room. The irony wasn't lost on me now, sitting in what felt like the darkest moment of my life. Marcus couldn't sell the house. Legally, he couldn't. My name was on the deed. Sole ownership transferred to me when Grandma passed 3 years ago. But as I sat there, replaying his words over and over, a cold realization crept up my spine. Marcus worked in real estate. He knew every loophole, every legal gray area, every way to manipulate property laws. More importantly, he had access to all my documents. My social security card. My birth certificate. Hell, he'd helped me organize all the paperwork when we inherited the house. He'd been so supportive then. So loving. "This is amazing, Sarah," he'd said, wrapping his arms around me as we stood in the living room, still smelling faintly of Grandma's lavender sachets. "This house is going to be our fresh start." Our fresh start. What a joke. I tried calling our joint bank account hotline with trembling fingers. The automated system cheerfully informed me that our main account had been closed yesterday. Yesterday. While I was at work, teaching 3rd graders about the water cycle, Marcus had been systematically dismantling our entire life together. The landline rang, Grandma's old rotary phone that I'd kept more for nostalgia than function. I lunged for it, hoping against hope that this was all some sick joke. "Sarah, honey, is that you?" It was Mrs. Brennan from next door, her voice tight with concern. "I just saw the most peculiar thing. There were men here earlier with a moving truck, taking furniture out of your house. I called out to them, but they said they were authorized by the new owners." New owners. "Mrs. Brennan," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "What men? What did they look like?" "Well, there were 3 of them, dear. Professional movers, by the look of it. They had all the right paperwork, said the house had been sold and they were clearing it out for the new family moving in next week. I thought it was strange that you hadn't mentioned anything, but you know how these things go sometimes." The room was spinning. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. "Did you see Marcus? Was my husband there?" "Oh yes, honey. He was directing the whole operation. Looked quite pleased with himself, actually. Had some woman with him I'd never seen before, pretty little thing with red hair. They were standing by a silver BMW, going over some paperwork. A woman with red hair. In that moment, sitting in my grandmother's kitchen surrounded by the ghosts of Sunday dinners and birthday celebrations, everything clicked into place with horrible clarity. The late nights Marcus claimed were client meetings. The new cologne. The way he'd stopped touching me, stopped looking at me, stopped seeing me as anything more than an obstacle to whatever new life he'd planned. But here's what Marcus didn't know, couldn't know, because I'd never told him. I'd never told anyone. The house he'd just sold, the one he'd somehow managed to forge documents for, manipulate the system for, steal right out from under me, it wasn't the only property my grandmother had left me. I pulled out the old jewelry box from the kitchen drawer, the same one where Grandma kept her important papers mixed in with grocery coupons and church bulletins. My fingers found what I was looking for, a small brass key and a yellowed envelope with my name written in Grandma's careful cursive. Inside was a deed to another property. A property Marcus had no idea existed. The lake house. The property Grandma had bought back in 1962 under her maiden name, Patterson, before she married Grandpa. The property she'd paid taxes on quietly for 60 years, never mentioning it to anyone except me, and only then in her final days when the morphine made her talkative about old secrets. "Sarah, darling," she'd whispered, holding my hand with surprising strength despite the cancer eating her alive. "There's something I need you to know. Something about the lake house." I'd thought it was the medication talking. Grandma had always told stories, some true, some embellished, some complete fiction designed to entertain a restless granddaughter. But she'd pressed this key into my palm and made me promise to check the old filing cabinet in her bedroom after she was gone. I'd found the deed, filed away under Patterson instead of our family name, Morrison. Waterfront property on Lake Tahoe, purchased outright in 1962 for $8,000. Current estimated value, $2.3 million. Marcus, in his arrogance and his greed, had just sold a $180,000 Victorian house and thought he'd stolen my entire inheritance. He had no idea what was coming. I picked up my phone and dialed the number I'd memorized but never used. Patterson Property Management, this is Linda speaking. "Hi Linda, this is Sarah Morrison. I believe you've been managing a property for my grandmother, Clara Patterson." "Oh my goodness, Sarah. I've been wondering when I'd hear from you. I was so sorry to hear about Clara's passing. She was such a lovely woman. Are you calling about the lake house? We've been maintaining it just as she requested, and I have to tell you, we've had some very interesting inquiries lately." My heart stopped. What kind of inquiries? Well, there's been a developer who's been very persistent about purchasing the property. He's called at least a dozen times in the past month, offering cash sight unseen. I told him what I told everyone. The property isn't for sale, per Mrs. Patterson's instructions. But he seemed to think there might be some confusion about ownership after her passing. A developer. A real estate professional who somehow knew about a property that wasn't even listed under the right name. "Linda," I said, my voice steady for the first time all day, "can you describe this developer?" "Oh, let me see. Tall, dark hair, very confident. Drove a silver BMW. Said his name was Michael Rodriguez, but something about him seemed, I don't know, shifty. He kept asking very specific questions about the deed, about whether the property had been transferred to any heirs. I got the impression he was fishing for information." Michael Rodriguez. Marcus's middle name was Michael. His mother's maiden name was Rodriguez. My husband hadn't just stolen my house. He'd been planning this for months, maybe years. Researching my grandmother's properties, trying to figure out how to get his hands on everything she'd left me. But he'd missed the big prize. And now, finally, I knew exactly how to make him pay. "Linda," I said, walking over to the window where I could see the empty rooms of what used to be my home, "I'd like to discuss putting the lake house on the market. But first, I need you to tell me everything about this Michael Rodriguez." Everything. As I listened to Linda describe my husband's attempts to steal my grandmother's lake house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. Real, tangible power over my own life. Marcus thought he'd left me with nothing. He thought he'd been so clever, so thorough in his betrayal. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Mrs. Henderson, the principal, was so shocked she asked if I needed her to call an ambulance. Sarah, honey, you haven't taken a single sick day since you started here. Are you sure you're okay? I wasn't okay. I was furious. But fury, I was learning, could be incredibly clarifying. I drove to downtown Sacramento in my dented Honda Civic, the same car Marcus had been meaning to replace for the past 2 years. Now I understood why he'd never bothered. He'd been planning his exit strategy all along, and my reliable transportation wasn't part of his new life equation. My first stop was the law office of Janet Morrison, no relation, despite the name, a family attorney my teachers' union had recommended when Grandma passed. I'd used her services to handle the probate, and she'd been thorough, kind, and refreshingly honest about the whole process. Sarah. Janet stood up from behind her mahogany desk, concern etched across her face. I got your message. Sit down. Tell me what's happened. I laid it all out, the phone call, the moving truck, Mrs. Brennan's account of the mysterious redhead, the bank accounts, everything. Janet listened without interruption, taking notes in her precise handwriting. Okay, she said finally, setting down her pen. Let's start with the good news. What your husband did is not only morally reprehensible, it's also highly illegal. Identity theft, forgery, fraud, we're talking about serious federal crimes here. But the house is already sold. Mrs. Brennan saw the new owner's moving truck yesterday evening. Janet shook her head. Sarah, a fraudulent sale is void from the beginning. The new buyers are going to be upset, yes, but they'll get their money back. The real question is whether we can trace where Marcus put the proceeds. She pulled out a legal pad and started sketching what looked like a family tree. Now, tell me about this lake house. You're absolutely certain your grandmother owned it under her maiden name. I handed her the deed I'd found, along with the correspondence from Patterson Property Management. Janet's eyebrows raised as she read. Sarah, do you realize what this property is worth? Linda mentioned some developer interest, but this isn't just developer interest. This is prime Lake Tahoe waterfront. Pre-development, meaning it's grandfathered in under old zoning laws. Someone could build a resort on this land. She looked up at me, her expression serious. This property is worth more than your house, your car, and everything else you own combined. By a factor of 10. The room went quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. $2.3 million. That's what Linda had estimated, but hearing it from an attorney made it real. Janet, there's something else. The developer who's been calling Linda, I think it's Marcus. He's been using a fake name, but the description matches perfectly. Janet's pen stopped moving. If that's true, we're not just looking at fraud related to your Victorian house. We're looking at a much larger conspiracy. Your husband may have been researching your grandmother's assets for years, planning to steal everything. She leaned back in her chair, thinking. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to really consider your answer. What is it you want here? Do you want your husband back? Do you want to try to work this out? Or do you want justice? The question hung in the air like smoke. 6 months ago, if someone had asked me what I'd do if Marcus cheated on me, I'd have said we'd go to counseling. Work it out. Fight for our marriage. But this wasn't just cheating. This was calculated, premeditated destruction of everything my grandmother had worked for, everything she'd tried to leave me. This was Marcus looking me in the eye for months, maybe years, while planning to rob me blind. I want him to pay, I said quietly. I want him to understand what it feels like to lose everything. Janet smiled, not a pleasant smile, but the smile of a shark who just smelled blood in the water. Good. Because I have some ideas. My phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus. Sarah, I know you're upset, but this is for the best. The house was too much for us to maintain anyway. I've left your clothes in storage unit 247, on Industrial Boulevard. The key is under the fake rock by the office door. Take care of yourself. I showed the text to Janet, who photographed it with her phone. Evidence, she explained. This text admits he removed your belongings without permission. It also establishes a timeline. She looked at me carefully. Sarah, do you have somewhere to stay? Because I'm guessing the locks have been changed on the Victorian house. I hadn't thought about that. In all the chaos of discovering Marcus's betrayal, I hadn't considered the practical reality that I was now homeless. My grandmother's house, my house, was gone. My belongings were apparently in some storage unit. My joint bank account was closed. For the first time since yesterday's phone call, I felt the weight of my situation. Not just the betrayal, but the genuine crisis. Where was I going to sleep tonight? How was I going to pay for gas to get to work? What was I going to tell people? I don't know, I admitted. I guess I could get a hotel room, but without access to our bank account. Janet reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a business card. This is Elena Rodriguez. She's a private investigator I work with regularly. She's also a former police detective who specializes in financial crimes. I want you to call her this afternoon. She handed me another card. And this is David Chen. He's a forensic accountant. If Marcus has been planning this for months or years, there will be a paper trail. Credit checks, property searches, financial transfers. David can find money that people think they've hidden. Janet, I appreciate this, but I can't afford. Sarah. She held up a hand. You're sitting on a $2.3 million asset that your husband tried to steal. Both Elena and David work on contingency for cases like this. They get paid when we recover your money, not before. She stood up and walked around the desk. But first, we need to get you stable. Safe. Do you have any family nearby? I thought about my parents, retired in Phoenix. My sister Jennifer in Portland with her 2 kids. Good people, loving people, but also people who would ask a million questions I wasn't ready to answer. People who would want to fix my marriage instead of helping me destroy my husband. No, I said. No family close by. Okay. I'm going to make a few calls. There's a women's shelter downtown that handles situations like this, not just domestic violence, but financial abuse. It's temporary, but it's safe and clean, and it'll give you a base of operations while we figure this out. A women's shelter. 3 days ago, I was a married homeowner with a teaching job and a retirement account. Now I was potentially homeless, technically unemployed. How many sick days could I take before they replaced me? And learning terms like financial abuse. But something else was growing inside me, something that felt almost foreign after years of being Marcus's accommodating wife. It was rage, yes, but more than that. It was determination. Marcus thought he'd destroyed me. He thought he'd taken everything I had and left me powerless. He'd forgotten that my grandmother hadn't raised a victim. Clara Patterson had survived the Depression, World War II, raising 5 children on a factory worker's salary, and 60 years of marriage to a man who drank too much and dreamed too little. She'd bought real estate when women weren't supposed to, started her own business when people said she was too old, and saved every penny to make sure her family was taken care of long after she was gone. I was Clara Patterson's granddaughter. And Marcus Rodriguez, or whatever name he was using this week, was about to learn what that meant. Janet, I said, standing up straighter than I had in years. Make those calls. Set up the meetings. I want to know everything Marcus has done, everyone he's done it with, and every asset he thinks is hidden. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my contacts. And I want to know about this redhead Mrs. Brennan saw. Because something tells me she's not just his mistress. She's his partner. Janet's smile was sharp and approving. Now you're thinking like a prosecutor instead of a victim. This is going to be fun. As I walked out of Janet's office that morning, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Grandma's funeral. Purpose. Clear, focused purpose. Marcus had made one critical mistake in his grand plan to steal my life. He'd underestimated me. Elena Rodriguez turned out to be nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the gruff ex-cop I'd imagined, She was a petite woman in her 40s with kind eyes and calloused hands who met me at a coffee shop near UC Davis. She ordered black coffee and took notes in a worn leather notebook that looked like it had seen 1,000 cases. "Tell me about your normal routine," she said after I'd explained the situation. "What time did you leave for work? When did you come home? Did Marcus have regular patterns?" I found myself describing a life that, in retrospect, seemed pathetically predictable. I left for school at 7:15 every morning. I came home at 4:30, stopped at the grocery store on Thursdays, had dinner ready by 6 o'clock. Marcus worked late most nights, or claimed to. "Weekend showings," he said. "Client dinners. Professional development seminars." "How long has he been working these late nights?" Elena asked. "About 8 months, maybe longer. He said the real estate market was picking up after COVID, lots of opportunities for advancement." Elena made a note. "And the woman with red hair that your neighbor described, have you ever seen her before?" "No, never. But—" I paused, remembering something. Marcus did start getting a lot of phone calls that he'd take privately. He'd go out to the backyard or into his office and close the door. When I asked about it, he said it was confidential client information. "Sarah, I want you to think carefully. In the past year, did Marcus change any of his habits? New clothes, new cologne, different music in the car? Did he start working out, pay more attention to his appearance?" The answer hit me like a physical blow. Everything. He changed everything. My voice got smaller as the realization sank in. New cologne last Christmas. He joined a gym in February. Started buying expensive shirts. Got his hair cut at a salon instead of the barber shop he'd used for years. Elena nodded grimly. Classic pattern. He was trying to impress someone. She closed her notebook. "Sarah, I need to tell you something that's going to be hard to hear. Based on what you've described, this affair, and this plan to steal your assets, has been going on for at least a year. Maybe longer." "A year?" While I was teaching third graders and making Marcus dinner and worrying about whether our marriage was getting stale, he'd been systematically planning to destroy me. "There's something else," I said, pulling out my phone. "I've been thinking about the timing. The house sale, the moving truck, everything happened so fast. But real estate transactions take weeks, sometimes months. Marcus would have had to start this process months ago," Elena finished. "Which means he's been forging documents, impersonating you, and manipulating the system while living in your house, sleeping in your bed, and letting you cook his dinner every night. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, you know that moment when the betrayal stops being about what they did and becomes about who they actually are. That's where I was sitting in that coffee shop, realizing that the man I'd married didn't exist. Had never existed. Elena, what do we do first?" She reopened her notebook. "First, we follow the money. Every financial transaction leaves a digital footprint. David Chen, Janet's forensic accountant, is already working on tracing your joint accounts. But I want to focus on Marcus's activities." She slid a business card across the table. "I need you to call this number. It's a service that monitors your credit report in real time. If Marcus has been using your identity for months, there will be credit inquiries, possibly new accounts opened in your name." My stomach dropped. "You think he's opened credit cards using my information?" "Sarah, he sold your house using forged documents. Credit cards would be child's play." Elena's expression was gentle but firm. "I need you to prepare yourself. When we start pulling threads on financial fraud, we usually find more fraud underneath." I called the credit monitoring service right there in the coffee shop. The customer service representative, a cheerful woman named Kim, asked for my social security number, mother's maiden name, and a few other verification questions. "Okay, Mrs. Morrison, I'm pulling up your report now. Let me just, oh my." My heart stopped. "What is it?" There have been 17 credit inquiries on your report in the past 6 months. multiple credit card applications, a car loan application, and, this is unusual, someone applied for a business line of credit using your social security number just 2 weeks ago. Elena was writing furiously in her notebook. She held up a hand indicating I should keep the representative talking. Kim, can you tell me what companies made these inquiries? Well, let's see. Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo for the credit cards. The car loan was through Sacramento Valley Honda. And the business line of credit was through California Business Bank for something called, let me read this correctly, M&R Property Development LLC. M&R Marcus and somebody whose name started with R. Like the redhead Mrs. Brennan had seen. Kim, were any of these applications approved? I'm showing 5 approved credit card accounts with a combined limit of $87,000. The car loan was approved for $45,000. And the business line of credit is pending, but it's for $250,000. Elena grabbed the phone from my hand. Kim, this is Elena Rodriguez, private investigator. I'm working with Mrs. Morrison on a case of identity theft. I need you to put an immediate freeze on Mrs. Morrison's credit report and flag all of those accounts as fraudulent. Can you do that right now while we're on the phone? Absolutely. I'm also going to transfer you to our fraud department. They'll want to get a police report filed immediately. As Kim transferred the call, Elena looked at me with something that might have been admiration. Sarah, your husband isn't just a cheater who sold your house. He's running a sophisticated financial fraud operation. Those credit cards, that car loan, he's been funding his new life with your credit for months. The fraud department representative, a man named Tom with a thick Boston accent, walked me through the process of disputing the accounts. He explained that I'd need to file police reports, provide documentation of the identity theft, and potentially testify if any of the creditors wanted to pursue criminal charges. Mrs. Morrison, Tom said, I have to ask, do you live with the person who committed this fraud? Not anymore, I said, looking at Elena. He left yesterday. Good. Because, what you're describing isn't just identity theft. It's domestic financial abuse, and it's a federal crime. The FBI has a whole task force that deals with cases like yours. The FBI. Yesterday I was making apple pies and worrying about lesson plans. Today I was potentially going to be working with federal investigators to bring down my own husband. After we finished the call, Elena and I sat in silence for a moment. The coffee shop around us was filled with normal people having normal Tuesday afternoon conversations. Students studying for exams. Retirees reading newspapers. Young mothers with toddlers. None of them knew that their entire life could be destroyed by a single phone call from someone they trusted. Elena, I said finally, I need to ask you something. How often do women in my situation actually get justice? How often do the men who do this actually face consequences? She was quiet for a long moment, stirring her cold coffee. Honestly, not often enough. The system is set up to be forgiving of first-time offenders, especially if they're middle-class white men with no previous criminal record. Marcus will probably get a good lawyer, claim he was having a midlife crisis, say he never meant to hurt you. He'll offer to make restitution, do community service, attend counseling. And he'll get a slap on the wrist while you spend years rebuilding your credit, your finances, and your life. The old Sarah, the Sarah from 3 days ago, would have found this discouraging. Would have started thinking about forgiveness, about moving on, about healing. But that Sarah had died the moment Marcus said bye, and hung up the phone. Elena, I said, pulling out my phone, tell me about the lake house. Tell me how we use it to destroy him. Her smile was sharp and predatory. Now you're talking my language. She opened her laptop and pulled up a real estate website. Prime waterfront on Lake Tahoe. Your grandmother bought this for $8,000 in 1962. Current comparable sales in the area are running $2.50 to $3 million. But Marcus doesn't know I own it. Right. As far as he knows, he stole your only major asset. He thinks he's won. Elena's fingers flew over the keyboard. But what if we let him think he could steal this one too? I leaned forward. What do you mean? What if we set a trap? What if we let Marcus find out about the lake house, let him think he can pull the same scam twice, and catch him in the act? The idea was beautiful in its simplicity. Marcus had gotten away with stealing my house because I hadn't known what he was planning. But now I knew his methods, his timeline, his partner. Elena, how do we make sure he finds out about the lake house? Leave that to me, she said, closing the laptop. But first, we need to set up surveillance. I want to know where he's living, who he's with, and what he's planning next. She handed me a small device that looked like a USB drive. This is a GPS tracker. Next time you see Marcus's car, attach this under the rear bumper. It's magnetic, weatherproof, and completely undetectable. Next time I see his car, Elena, he's gone. He's left town. Sarah, men like Marcus don't disappear. They're too arrogant, too confident that they've outsmarted everyone. He'll surface. And when he does, we'll be ready. As I walked out of the coffee shop that afternoon, I felt something I'd never experienced before, the thrill of the hunt. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the prey. I was the predator. 3 days later, Elena's prediction proved correct. Marcus surfaced at the most predictable place possible, his favorite restaurant, Romano's, where we'd celebrated our anniversary every year for 7 years. Mrs. Henderson from next door called me at 11:30 p.m., whispering into the phone like we were conspirators. Sarah, honey, he's back. Marcus is at your old house. Well, I guess it's not your house anymore, is it? But he's there with that red-haired woman and another man I've never seen before. They're standing in the driveway with flashlights, pointing at different parts of the house. I was staying at an extended stay hotel near the school, living off the small emergency fund I'd managed to withdraw before Marcus closed our accounts. The room smelled like industrial disinfectant and other people's disappointments, but it had Wi-Fi and a working phone, which was all I needed to execute Elena's plan. Mrs. Brennan, can you see them clearly? What do they look like? Well, Marcus looks the same, though he's lost some weight. The woman is very pretty, early 30s maybe, wearing expensive clothes. And the other man, he's older, maybe 50s, very professional looking. They keep pointing at the roof and the foundation. A professional-looking older man. Elena had suspected Marcus wasn't working alone on this scheme. Someone with experience in real estate fraud, someone who knew the system well enough to forge documents and manipulate sales. Are they inside the house? I asked. No, just in the driveway and the front yard. Oh wait, they're getting back in their cars now. 2 cars, Marcus's BMW and a black Escalade. After Mrs. Brennan hung up, I immediately called Elena. He's scouting the property, she said without preamble. Probably checking to make sure the new owners haven't moved in yet, assessing whether there are any loose ends to tie up. The new owners, what happened to them? Janet's been handling that. The sale was voided yesterday, and they're being compensated for their inconvenience by the title company's insurance. But it'll be at least a week before they can actually move in, which gives us time. Elena's plan was elegant in its simplicity. We were going to let Marcus discover the lake house by planting information where he couldn't resist looking for it. The key was making it seem accidental, like he'd stumbled onto something I'd tried to hide. Sarah, tomorrow I need you to do something that's going to feel wrong, but trust me on this. I need you to go to your storage unit, the one where Marcus left your belongings. Spend about an hour going through things, acting upset and frustrated. Make a few phone calls while you're there, but keep your voice down like you don't want to be overheard. Phone calls about what? About needing to access your grandmother's other property to pay for legal fees. Mention that you're worried about the taxes, that you don't know how you're going to afford to maintain a second house. Really sell the idea that this property is a burden, not an asset. I understood immediately. Marcus had proven he was keeping tabs on me. How else would he have known my schedule well enough to clear out the house while I was at work? If he was watching me at the storage unit, he'd overhear conversations that would make the lake house sound like exactly the kind of desperate asset he could easily steal. Elena, how do you know he'll be watching the storage unit? Because men like Marcus can't help themselves. He thinks he's one, but is also paranoid that you might have resources he doesn't know about. He'll be monitoring your movements for at least a few weeks, making sure you're really as helpless as he intended you to be. The next morning, I drove to Industrial Boulevard feeling like an actor preparing for the most important performance of my life. The storage facility was exactly what I'd expected. Rows of identical metal buildings in a part of town where people stored things they couldn't afford to keep but couldn't bear to throw away. Unit 247 was a 10 by 10 space filled with black garbage bags and a few pieces of furniture Marcus had apparently deemed worthy of preservation. My wedding dress, carefully preserved in its original box. Photo albums from our honeymoon. My grandmother's china set. As I went through the bags, I felt a rage so pure it was almost cleansing. He'd thrown my clothes into garbage bags like they were trash. Shoes I'd worn on dates with him, mixed together with kitchen towels and random books. My jewelry box, Grandma's jewelry box, crammed into a bag with bathroom towels. But I forced myself to focus on the performance. After about 20 minutes of going through bags, I pulled out my phone and dialed Elena's number. "Hi, it's Sarah," I said, keeping my voice low and slightly panicked. "I'm at the storage unit, going through this mess Marcus left me, and I'm freaking out. I found Grandma's papers about the other house, and I don't know what to do." Elena played her part perfectly. "What other house?" "Sarah, I thought the Victorian was your only property." "No, there's... God, I should have mentioned this before. Grandma left me another house up at Lake Tahoe. It's under her maiden name, Patterson, and I've been paying property taxes on it for 3 years, but I never really thought about it because it seemed like such a headache to deal with." "Sarah, property at Lake Tahoe is incredibly valuable. You need to." "I know," I interrupted, letting genuine frustration creep into my voice. "But Elena, I can't afford to maintain 2 properties, especially not one that's 4 hours away. The property management company says there are major repairs needed. The dock is falling apart, the roof needs work. It's going to cost more than I make in a year just to get it up to code." I paused, looking around the storage unit like I was making sure no one was listening. "Elena, I'm thinking about selling it. I know Grandma wanted it to stay in the family, but I don't have a choice. I need the money for legal fees, and honestly, what am I going to do with a lake house? It's just going to be another thing for Marcus to try to steal if he finds out about it." I let that hang in the air for a moment, then continued in a whisper. "The property management company says they've been getting calls from some developer who wants to buy it, but I told them absolutely not. The last thing I need is someone harassing me about selling when I'm trying to figure out how to keep my life together. Sarah, don't make any hasty decisions about the lake house. Let me do some research on property values up there, okay? Maybe it's worth more than you think." "Maybe. I feel so overwhelmed. I'm going to finish going through this stuff and then drive up there this weekend to see what kind of shape the house is in. Maybe if I can get a better sense of what needs to be done, I can make a rational decision." After I hung up, I continued sorting through my belongings for another 40 minutes, occasionally muttering things like "I can't believe he threw this away" and "Where are my important documents?" As I loaded the last bag into my Honda, I noticed a black Escalade parked across the street, the same vehicle Mrs. Brennan had described. The windows were tinted, but I could see the shadow of someone in the driver's seat. Marcus had taken the bait. That evening, Elena called with an update that made my blood sing with anticipation. "Sarah, your performance was Academy Award worthy. Within 2 hours of your storage unit visit, someone accessed Clara Patterson's property records through the Placer County Assessor's website. The IP address traces back to a coffee shop in downtown Sacramento. He's researching the lake house. Gets better. David Chen found something interesting in Marcus's financial records. 3 weeks ago, he made a $500 payment to something called Northern California Document Services. It's a company that specializes in Let's call them expedited document preparation. I felt a chill run down my spine. Fake documents. Most likely. And Sarah, remember that business line of credit application? M&R Property Development? We found the incorporation papers. Marcus Rodriguez is listed as the managing partner, and the other partner is Rebecca Marie Thornton. Rebecca. The redhead had a name. Elena, tell me about Rebecca Thornton. 32 years old, originally from Phoenix. She's got a real estate license in California and Nevada, but her record isn't exactly clean. 2 complaints filed with the state licensing board for aggressive sales practices, and she was briefly investigated for mortgage fraud in 2019, though no charges were filed. So Marcus hadn't just found a mistress. He'd found a partner with experience in real estate fraud. There's more, Elena continued. Rebecca Thornton owns a condo in South Lake Tahoe. Purchased 8 months ago with a cash down payment of $150,000. Want to guess where that down payment came from? Marcus. A series of transfers from your joint accounts, spread over several months and disguised as various business expenses. David's still tracking all the transfers, but we're looking at least $200,000 that Marcus moved out of accounts with your name on them. I was quiet for a long moment, processing the scope of what Marcus and Rebecca had been planning. This wasn't a crime of passion or a midlife crisis. This was a systematic, long-term plan to steal everything I had and start a new life together. But they'd made one critical error. They'd assumed I was the same naive woman Marcus had married 7 years ago. The woman who trusted everyone, who always saw the best in people, who never questioned anything. That woman was gone. Elena, I want to move forward with the trap. How do we make sure Marcus and Rebecca try to steal the lake house? Already in motion. Linda at Patterson Property Management is going to start taking calls from interested buyers in the next few days. She'll mention to anyone who asks that the current owner seems overwhelmed and might be open to a quick cash sale. And if Marcus calls her as Michael Rodriguez? Elena's laugh was sharp and predatory. Then Linda is going to tell him that she's heard from the owner's attorney that there might be some confusion about the deed, that the property might not have been properly transferred after Clara Patterson's death. She'll suggest that a knowledgeable buyer might be able to navigate the legal complexities better than the current owner. It was perfect. We were going to make Marcus think that the lake house was another easy target, another confused woman who didn't understand her own assets. When do we spring the trap? This weekend. You're going to drive up to the lake house, just like you mentioned in your phone call. But you're not going alone. David and I will be there, along with Janet and a few other people Marcus won't expect to see. What other people? FBI agents, Sarah. This isn't just identity theft anymore. This is interstate fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and probably a dozen other federal crimes. When Marcus tries to steal the lake house, we're going to make sure it's the last property he ever steals from anyone. After Elena hung up, I sat in my hotel room looking at the photo album I'd rescued from the storage unit. Pictures of Marcus and me at our wedding, on our honeymoon, at birthday parties and Christmas mornings. In every single photo, I was smiling at him with complete trust and adoration. Looking at those pictures now was like looking at evidence from a crime scene. Because that's exactly what they were. If you're watching this and you've ever had someone you trusted completely betray you, you know there's a moment when the sadness stops and the anger takes over. That's where I was sitting in that sterile hotel room, looking at pictures of a marriage that had been a lie from the beginning. Marcus thought he'd destroyed me. He thought he'd taken everything and left me powerless. But tomorrow, I was going to start taking my power back. And by the time I was finished, Marcus Rodriguez and Rebecca Thornton were going to understand exactly what it felt like to lose everything. The hunt was about to begin. Saturday morning came with the kind of crisp October air that makes you believe in new beginnings. I drove north on Highway 80 toward Lake Tahoe, following GPS directions to an address I'd never seen but that had been in my family for 60 years. Elena and David were in the car behind me, maintaining enough distance to look like unrelated travelers but close enough to provide backup if anything went wrong. The lake house sat on 3 acres of prime waterfront property, hidden behind a stand of old-growth pines that blocked it from the main road. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, I understood for the first time why Marcus had been so determined to steal this property. It wasn't just a house. It was a legacy. The main structure was a classic 1960s A-frame cabin, probably modest by modern Lake Tahoe standards but perfectly maintained. Wide windows looked out over the lake, and a stone fireplace dominated the living room. But the real treasure was the location. 200 feet of private shoreline with a deep water dock and a small beach that would be worth millions to the right developer. Linda from Patterson Property Management met me at the front door with a ring of keys and a warm smile. She was exactly what I'd expected from our phone conversations, a woman in her 60s with the kind of practical competence that comes from managing other people's properties for decades. "Sarah, I'm so glad to finally meet you in person. Your grandmother was one of my favorite clients. She had such wonderful stories about this place." As Linda showed me through the house, I felt Clara's presence everywhere. The kitchen still had her favorite coffee mugs in the cabinet. Her books lined the shelves in the living room. There were photo albums on the side table showing generations of family gatherings I'd never known about. "She used to come up here every spring to open the house for the season," Linda explained as we walked out onto the deck. "Even when she got older and the drive became difficult for her, she insisted on doing it herself. She said this place kept her connected to your grandfather." I hadn't known that my grandfather had loved this house. Hadn't known that Clara came here every year. There was so much about my grandmother's life that I'd never bothered to ask about, and now it was too late. "Linda, you mentioned that someone's been calling about buying the property." Her expression grew careful. "Yes, several people actually. There's been quite a bit of interest since word got out that Clara had passed. But there was one caller who was particularly persistent, that Michael Rodriguez I mentioned. He called again yesterday, actually." My pulse quickened. What did he want to know? Very specific questions about the deed, about whether the property had been properly transferred to the heir. He seemed to know a lot about real estate law, but he was fishing for information about whether you might be in over your head financially. "What did you tell him?" Linda smiled grimly. "Exactly what Elena Rodriguez told me to tell him. That the current owner seemed overwhelmed by the inheritance and might be open to a quick cash sale, but that there might be some legal complexities with the transfer that could work in a buyer's favor." As we walked back toward the house, I noticed a car parked on the access road about a quarter-mile away, close enough to see the property but far enough away to seem casual. Even from a distance, I could tell it was a silver BMW. Marcus was here, watching, planning his next move. "Linda, I need to ask you to do something that might seem strange. I need you to leave now, very obviously, like you're done showing me the property. But I want you to stop at that car on the access road and see if the driver has any questions about the property." Linda followed my gaze and nodded understanding. "You think that's your husband?" "I think that's the man who's been trying to steal my inheritance." After Linda left, I called Elena on her cell phone. "He's here. Silver BMW, parked about a quarter-mile down the access road. We see him. David's got binoculars and a telephoto lens. We can confirm it's Marcus, and there's a woman in the passenger seat matching Rebecca Thornton's description." "What do I do?" "Act like you don't know they are there. Go through the house like you're evaluating what needs to be done. Take some photos. Call someone and complain about how expensive the repairs are going to be. Really sell the idea that this property is more burden than blessing." I spent the next hour playing my role perfectly. I took photos of every room, focusing on things that looked like problems: a small water stain on one ceiling, some loose boards on the deck, normal wear and tear that could be spun as major issues to someone who didn't know any better. Around noon, I called my sister Jennifer in Portland. "Jen, it's Sarah. I'm at Grandma's lake house, and I'm completely overwhelmed." Jennifer, bless her, played along perfectly without knowing she was part of an elaborate sting operation. "Lake house? Sarah, I didn't know Grandma had a lake house." "Neither did I, really. I mean, I knew she owned some property up at Tahoe, but I thought it was just a vacant lot or something. It turns out it's this whole house on the water, and Jen, I have no idea what to do with it. I walked out onto the deck where my voice would carry clearly across the water. The property management company says it needs major work, new roof, foundation issues, the dock is falling apart. They're talking about $100,000 just to bring it up to current safety codes. Sarah, maybe you should get a second opinion before you make any decisions. I can't afford a second opinion. I can barely afford the property taxes as it is, between the divorce and the legal fees. I let my voice break a little. Jen, I'm thinking about selling it. I know Grandma wanted it to stay in the family, but what am I supposed to do? I can't maintain a property 4 hours away when I can barely keep my own life together. After I hung up with Jennifer, I spent another hour walking around the property, taking more photos and occasionally stopping to stare out at the lake like I was trying to make an impossible decision. Around 2 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number with a 916 area code, Sacramento. Hello. Is this Sarah Morrison? The voice was male, professional, unfamiliar. Yes, who is this? My name is Michael Rodriguez. I'm a real estate developer, and I understand you own property on Lake Tahoe that you might be interested in selling. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. How did you get my number? I've been working with Linda Patterson at Patterson Property Management. She mentioned that you might be open to discussing a sale. Mr. Rodriguez, I don't know what Linda told you, but I haven't made any decisions about selling. Of course. I completely understand. But Mrs. Morrison, I want you to know that I specialize in helping people who've inherited properties they can't afford to maintain. I understand you're going through a difficult divorce, and property like yours, well, it can be complicated to manage from a distance. The words sent a chill down my spine. How did he know about my divorce? Linda hadn't mentioned that to anyone. I'm not sure what you mean by complicated. Well, waterfront property comes with a lot of regulatory issues. Environmental assessments, shoreline permits, compliance with county zoning laws. And from what I understand, your grandmother's estate might have some transfer issues that could complicate a traditional sale. Transfer issues. He was laying the groundwork to claim that I didn't have clear title to the property. Mr. Rodriguez, I appreciate your call, but I'm not ready to discuss selling. I understand. But Mrs. Morrison, let me ask you something. Have you had the property appraised lately? Because I think you might be surprised by what it's actually worth in today's market. What do you mean? I mean that waterfront property on Lake Tahoe, even property that needs significant repairs, can be quite valuable to the right buyer. I'd be willing to make you a cash offer, sight unseen, that would give you the financial freedom to move on with your life. How much are we talking about? $200,000. Cash. Close in 30 days. No inspections, no financing contingencies. You could walk away with enough money to start over, and you wouldn't have to worry about property taxes, maintenance, or any of those transfer complications. $200,000 for a property worth at least $2.3 million. He was offering less than 10% of the actual value. That's very generous, I said, forcing myself to sound tempted instead of furious. But I should probably get an appraisal first, talk to a real estate agent. Mrs. Morrison, can I be frank with you? In my experience, people in your situation often find that traditional real estate agents and appraisers don't understand the complexities involved with inherited waterfront property. There are environmental liabilities, potential tax issues, questions about clear title. By the time you pay for appraisals, inspections, legal fees, and real estate commissions, you might not walk away with much more than what I'm offering you right now. He was good. If I'd actually been a desperate, overwhelmed widow who didn't understand property values, his pitch would have been very tempting. Can I think about it? Of course. But Mrs. Morrison, I should mention that I'm looking at several properties in the area, and I can only make one acquisition this quarter. If you're interested, I'd need to know fairly soon. How soon? Could we meet tomorrow? I could drive up to the property, take a look around, and we could have everything signed by Monday. Tomorrow. He wanted to close the deal tomorrow. Mr. Rodriguez, I'm not sure I'm ready to move that fast. I understand your hesitation. But think about it this way. What if something happens to the property while you're trying to decide? What if there's storm damage, or vandalism, or some environmental issue? Waterfront property is a liability as much as it is an asset. Cash in hand is always better than potential value on paper. After he hung up, I immediately called Elena. He took the bait. Michael Rodriguez just offered me $200,000 cash for the lake house. Perfect. Did he want to meet? Tomorrow. Elena, he knows about my divorce. He knows I'm having financial problems. He's been researching my situation. Which means he's been planning this for weeks, maybe months. Sarah, this is going to be beautiful. By tomorrow afternoon, Marcus and Rebecca are going to be under federal arrest. As I drove away from the lake house that afternoon, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw the silver BMW pull out behind me. Marcus was following me, probably making sure I was really leaving, really as helpless and desperate as I seemed. If he'd known what was waiting for him tomorrow, he might have made different choices. But it was too late for different choices. Tomorrow, Marcus was going to learn what happened when you tried to steal from Clara Patterson's granddaughter. Sunday morning felt like Christmas and execution day rolled into one. I was back at the lake house by 9 a.m., but this time I wasn't alone. Elena and David had arrived an hour earlier, along with 2 FBI agents who looked nothing like what I'd expected from television. Agent Sarah Chen was a petite Asian woman in hiking clothes who could have been mistaken for a weekend tourist. Agent Michael Torres was a soft-spoken Latino man in his 40s who spent most of his time setting up surveillance equipment with the focused attention of a surgeon. Sarah, I need you to understand what's about to happen, Agent Chen explained as we reviewed the plan one final time. When Marcus arrives, he's going to commit federal crimes in front of federal agents. This isn't a civil matter anymore. This is criminal fraud, conspiracy, identity theft, and possibly extortion. Janet had arrived from Sacramento with a briefcase full of legal documents, including the authentic deed to the lake house, Marcus's forged documents from the Victorian house sale, and David's forensic accounting report showing the paper trail of stolen funds. The key, Janet explained, is letting Marcus believe he's in control of the situation. He thinks he's dealing with a desperate, naive woman who doesn't understand what she owns. Let him maintain that illusion right up until the moment we arrest him. At 11:30 a.m., my phone rang. Michael Rodriguez again. Mrs. Morrison, I'm about 15 minutes away from the property. Are you there? Yes, I'm here. Mr. Rodriguez, I have to admit, I'm having second thoughts about this whole thing. I completely understand. That's normal. But remember what we discussed yesterday. Sometimes the best decision is the quick decision. Are you alone? An interesting question. Was he worried about witnesses? Yes, I'm alone. Just me and my doubts. Mrs. Morrison, when I get there, I'm going to show you exactly why this is the right choice for your future. 15 minutes later, the silver BMW pulled into the driveway. Marcus got out first, and seeing him in person for the first time since this nightmare began was like being punched in the stomach. He looked good, rested, confident, wearing clothes I'd never seen before. Expensive clothes. Rebecca Thornton emerged from the passenger side, and she was exactly what Mrs. Brennan had described. Early 30s, red hair, beautiful in the way that costs money to maintain. She was carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the kind of casual weekend clothes that probably cost more than I made in a month. From my position on the deck, I waved like I was greeting strangers instead of the man who'd stolen my entire life. Mrs. Morrison. Marcus called out, his voice pitched slightly higher than normal. I'm Michael Rodriguez. We spoke on the phone yesterday. I walked down to meet them, noting how Marcus avoided making direct eye contact. Even in the middle of committing fraud, some part of him was ashamed to look at me directly. This is my associate, Rebecca Thornton, he said, gesturing to the redhead. She's a licensed real estate agent who specializes in waterfront properties. Rebecca stepped forward with a professional smile and an extended hand. Mrs. Morrison, I'm so sorry for your loss. Linda mentioned that you recently lost your grandmother. The audacity was breathtaking. This woman had been sleeping with my husband, spending money stolen from my accounts, and now she was expressing sympathy for my grandmother's death. Thank you, I managed. It's been a difficult time. I'm sure it has, Rebecca continued smoothly. Inheriting property can be overwhelming, especially when you're dealing with other life challenges. That's why Michael and I wanted to meet with you in person, to help you understand your options. Michael, pulled out a tablet and started showing me comparable property sales in the area. But the numbers were all wrong. He was showing me sales of smaller lots without water access, older properties that needed major renovation, anything that would make his $200,000 offer seem reasonable. As you can see, he said, waterfront property in this area has been declining in value over the past few years. Environmental regulations, fire danger, increased property taxes, it's becoming less attractive to buyers. Everything he said was a lie. Lake Tahoe waterfront property had been appreciating at double-digit rates for the past 5 years. But Michael, I said, playing my role perfectly, this property seems so much nicer than those others you're showing me. Rebecca jumped in. Mrs. Morrison, can I be honest with you? This property has some significant issues that might not be obvious to someone without real estate experience. She walked me around the property, pointing out problems that were either completely fabricated or normal maintenance issues blown out of proportion. The dock was structurally unsound. It wasn't. The septic system was probably failing. It had been inspected and certified just last year. The driveway needed major grading work. It needed gravel. The biggest issue, Rebecca continued as we walked back toward the house, is the title situation. When properties are inherited, especially properties that have been in families for a long time, there are often complications with the deed. What kind of complications? Marcus, I had to keep thinking of him as Michael, pulled a folder from Rebecca's briefcase. Mrs. Morrison, I've done some research on your property, and I'm concerned there might be some clouds on the title that could make it difficult to sell through traditional channels. He handed me a stack of papers that looked official but were probably fabricated. It appears your grandmother may not have properly transferred this property into her trust before she died. There could be tax liens, estate issues, maybe even competing claims from other family members. Other family members? But I'm her only heir. According to the county records, yes. But Mrs. Morrison, county records aren't always complete. If there were other beneficiaries named in earlier wills, or if there were debts against the property that weren't properly resolved. Rebecca picked up the thread seamlessly. The good news is that buyers like Michael who specialize in complicated properties know how to navigate these issues. He can take on the legal risk, handle any title problems, and give you a clean cash transaction that eliminates all the uncertainty. It was a masterful performance. If I hadn't known they were lying, if I hadn't spent the past week learning exactly how property fraud worked, I might have been convinced. I don't know, I said, wrapping my arms around myself like I was cold. This is all happening so fast. Maybe I should talk to a lawyer first. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Morrison, of course you should do whatever makes you comfortable. But I have to tell you, involving lawyers in a situation like this often creates more problems than it solves. What do you mean? Well, once you start questioning the title, once you get attorneys involved, word gets out. Other people might start making claims on the property. The county might decide to investigate the tax situation. You could end up spending years and thousands of dollars in legal fees, just to find out that the property can't be sold at all. Rebecca nodded sympathetically. We've seen it happen, unfortunately. People who inherit complicated properties and try to do everything by the book often end up losing everything to legal costs and tax liens. But if I sell to you? Clean, simple transaction, Marcus said. We take on all the risk, handle all the legal complications, and you walk away with $200,000 cash. No lawyers, no uncertainty, no years of stress. I looked back and forth between them, letting them see the internal struggle on my face. Two con artists who thought they were manipulating a grieving, desperate widow. Two thieves who had no idea they were being recorded by federal agents. How would this work, exactly? Rebecca pulled more papers from her briefcase. It's very simple. You sign a purchase agreement today, we handle all the paperwork and title research over the next 2 weeks, and we close with a cashier's check. Michael's already been approved for financing, so there won't be any delays. Marcus handed me a pen. Mrs. Morrison, I know this feels overwhelming, but sometimes the best thing you can do is trust experienced professionals to guide you through a difficult situation. Trust experienced professionals. The man who'd stolen my house, emptied my bank accounts, and destroyed my marriage was asking me to trust him. I looked down at the purchase agreement, noting that it was for $200,000 for property they knew was worth more than 10 times that amount. I noted that the buyer was listed as M&R Property Development, the same company that had applied for a business line of credit using my stolen identity. There's just one thing, I said, looking up at both of them with the most innocent expression I could manage. Before I sign anything, I should probably mention something about this property that you might not know. Marcus and Rebecca exchanged glances. What's that, Mrs. Morrison? I smiled, not the desperate, grateful smile they were expecting, but something else entirely. Well, the thing is, I've been recording this entire conversation. And those people in the hiking clothes who've been watching us from the trees? Those are FBI agents. For a moment, nobody moved. Marcus stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. Rebecca's professional smile flickered and died. Mrs. Morrison, I think there's been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, Marcus, I said, using his real name for the first time. The only misunderstanding was yours. You thought I was the same naive woman you married 7 years ago. You thought you could steal my house, empty my bank accounts, and then come back for more. Marcus's face went white. Sarah, I can explain. Agent Chen, I called out, I think we've heard enough. The FBI agents emerged from the tree line like something out of a movie. Agent Torres had his badge out, Agent Chen had her hand near her weapon, and Elena was following behind them with the biggest smile I'd ever seen on a human being. Marcus Rodriguez and Rebecca Thornton, Agent Chen announced, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, and interstate transportation of stolen property. As the agents read them their rights, Marcus kept staring at me like he couldn't quite believe what was happening. Sarah, you don't understand. I was trying to help you. The house, the money, it was all to give us a better life. Us. I laughed, and it was the first genuine laugh I'd had in months. Marcus, there is no us. There hasn't been an us for a long time. But there's definitely going to be a you in federal prison. Rebecca was crying now, her perfect makeup running down her cheeks. This isn't what it looks like. We were just trying to help her understand her options. Agent Torres said patiently as he handcuffed her, we have recordings of you discussing forged documents, fabricated title problems, and fraudulent property valuations. We have financial records showing you've been spending money stolen from Mrs. Morrison's accounts. And we have evidence that you and Mr. Rodriguez have been running similar scams on other widows and divorced women throughout California and Nevada. Other widows. Other women like me who'd trusted the wrong people and lost everything. As the agents led Marcus and Rebecca to their car, Marcus turned back one more time. Sarah, he called out, I loved you. I still love you. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. I walked over to him, close enough to see the fear in his eyes. Marcus, I said quietly, you never loved me. You loved the idea of me, the convenient wife who didn't ask questions, who trusted you completely, who never checked the bank accounts or wondered where you really were on those late nights. I paused, letting him see the woman he'd created with his betrayal. But that woman is gone. And the woman standing here now? She's Clara Patterson's granddaughter. And Clara Patterson's granddaughter doesn't forgive. She doesn't forget. And she sure as hell doesn't lose. As the FBI car drove away with my husband and his partner in handcuffs, I stood on the deck of my grandmother's lake house and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete, absolute victory. But the story wasn't over yet. 3 hours after Marcus and Rebecca were arrested, I was sitting in the FBI field office in Sacramento, going through evidence that made me sick to my stomach. Agent Chen had spread financial documents across a conference table that told the story of a fraud operation much larger and more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. Sarah, what your husband and Ms. Thornton were running wasn't just a crime of opportunity, Agent Chen explained. This was a systematic operation targeting recently widowed and divorced women throughout the western United States. She pointed to a map covered with red pins. 17 women in the past 2 years. All of them lost property, savings, retirement accounts. Combined losses of over $3.2 million. I stared at the map, feeling a mixture of rage and heartbreak. 17 women who'd trusted someone they shouldn't have. 17 women who'd been left with nothing while Marcus and Rebecca built their new life on stolen money. How did they find these women? Agent Torres opened a laptop and showed me a database that looked like something from a spy movie. They were incredibly thorough. Marcus used his real estate license to access property records, death certificates, divorce filings. Rebecca had contacts at several title companies who would tip them off about vulnerable properties. He scrolled through screen after screen of data. Names, addresses, property values, family situations, financial status. They were particularly good at finding women who owned valuable property but didn't understand its worth. Elderly widows who inherited family farms. Divorced women who got the house in the settlement but couldn't afford to maintain it. Women like you who inherited property in unfamiliar markets. David Chen, no relation to Agent Chen, had arrived from his office with more forensic accounting records. Sarah, I've traced every transaction involving money stolen from your accounts. It's worse than we initially thought. He handed me a summary that made my hands shake. Marcus hadn't just emptied our joint accounts. He'd been systematically stealing from me for over 2 years, using my identity to open credit cards, take out loans, even file fraudulent tax returns. Total theft from your accounts and credit, $347,000, David said quietly. But that's just the beginning. The money Marcus stole from you was used as seed capital for the larger operation. Agent Chen picked up the explanation. Your husband and Ms. Thornton were running what we call a Ponzi-adjacent scheme. They'd use money stolen from one victim to finance the theft of larger properties from subsequent victims. Each theft funded the next one. So Marcus didn't just steal from me. He used my money to steal from other women. Exactly. And Sarah, there's something else you need to know. The Victorian house Marcus sold? It wasn't their first time using that particular method. She handed me a file folder labeled Morrison, Sarah, victim number 12. Victim number 12. I was the 12th woman whose life Marcus had destroyed. 3 other women lost their homes the same way: forged documents, fraudulent sales, identities stolen by partners they trusted. All of them are now living in subsidized housing or with relatives, trying to rebuild their lives. As I read through the case files, I saw my own story repeated over and over again. Women who'd trusted men who seemed caring and supportive. Women who'd shared their financial information with partners who used it to destroy them. Women who'd been left with nothing while their abusers lived in luxury. But there was one difference between my case and the others. All of the other victims had been left truly destitute. Marcus had managed to steal everything they owned. I still had the lake house. Agent Chen, what happens to the other victims? Do they get their money back? Some of it. We've frozen all of Marcus and Rebecca's accounts, seized their properties, and we're working with the district attorney's office to ensure full restitution. But honestly, Sarah, most of these women will never recover everything they lost. I thought about the elderly widow in Fresno who'd lost her family farm. The divorced teacher in Portland who'd lost her house and retirement savings. Women who were now living in poverty because of crimes that started with money stolen from my accounts. Agent Chen, I want to do something for the other victims. What do you mean? I looked out the window at the Sacramento skyline, thinking about Clara Patterson and what she would have done in this situation. My grandmother had survived the Depression by helping her neighbors, by sharing what little she had, by understanding that community was the only thing that could protect people when the system failed them. The lake house is worth at least $2.3 million. Marcus and Rebecca never got their hands on it, so it's still mine, free and clear. I want to sell it and use the proceeds to help the other victims. Agent Torres looked up from his laptop. Sarah, that's incredibly generous, but you don't have to. Yes, I do. I stood up, feeling more certain about this decision than I had about anything in months. Marcus used my money to fund his operation. My stolen identity helped him establish credibility with other victims. In some ways, every woman he hurt after he started stealing from me was hurt because of money that was originally mine. Janet, who had been quietly taking notes throughout the meeting, looked up with something that might have been pride. Sarah, legally speaking, you have no obligation to compensate the other victims. The crimes committed against them are separate from the crimes committed against you. I don't care about legal obligations, I said. I care about doing what's right. And what's right is making sure that the money Marcus never got to steal goes to help the women he did steal from. Agent Chen exchanged glances with Agent Torres. Sarah, we'd have to work out the logistics carefully. Any financial transfers related to this case have to be approved by the court, documented properly. Then let's document it properly. Janet, can you set up some kind of fund? Something that ensures the money goes directly to the victims for housing, medical expenses, legal fees, whatever they need to rebuild their lives. Over the next hour, we worked out the details. The lake house would be sold at fair market value, with the proceeds going into a victim compensation fund managed by Janet's law firm and overseen by the FBI. Each of the 17 victims would receive a proportional share based on their losses, with priority given to women who'd lost their homes or primary residences. But I had one more condition. I want to meet them, I told Agent Chen. All of them. I want to look every single woman in the eye and tell them that Marcus and Rebecca are going to prison, that justice is being served, and that they're not alone in this. Agent Chen hesitated. Sarah, some of these women might not want to meet with you. This has been traumatic for everyone involved, Anne. I understand. But I want them to know that they are not victims. They are survivors. And I want them to know that sometimes, when bad things happen to good people, other good people step up to help. By the time I left the FBI office that evening, the local news had picked up the story. A reporter was waiting in the parking lot with a cameraman, wanting to interview the brave woman who brought down a multi-million-dollar fraud ring. I almost kept walking. The old Sarah would have avoided the attention, would have wanted privacy to process what had happened. But the new Sarah, Clara Patterson's granddaughter, understood that some stories needed to be told publicly. Mrs. Morrison, the reporter called out, how does it feel to know that your courage helped save other women from being victimized? I stopped walking and turned to face the camera. It doesn't feel like courage, I said honestly. It feels like justice. And it feels like something my grandmother would have done. What would you say to other women who might be in similar situations? I thought about that question for a long moment, looking directly into the camera lens and imagining all the women watching who might be living with men they trusted but shouldn't, who might be sharing their lives with people who saw them as opportunities rather than partners. I'd say trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And I'd say that you're stronger than you think you are. When someone betrays your trust, when they steal from you or lie to you or try to destroy your life, you have choices. You can be a victim, or you can be a warrior. What's next for you? I smiled, and for the first time in months, it felt completely genuine. I'm going back to teaching. I'm going to help 17 incredible women rebuild their lives. And I'm going to make sure that Marcus Rodriguez and Rebecca Thornton spend a very long time thinking about what they did to people who trusted them. As I drove back to my hotel that night, My phone was buzzing with texts and calls from people who'd seen the news story. My sister Jennifer from Portland, crying and asking why I hadn't told her what I was going through. My parents in Phoenix, wanting to know if I needed anything, if I was okay, if there was something they could do. But the call that mattered most came at 11:30 p.m. from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Sarah Morrison?" The voice was female, elderly, shaky. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Dorothy Walsh. I was one of the women that man stole from. The FBI agent gave me your number and said you wanted to talk to us." Dorothy Walsh. I remembered her file, a 73-year-old widow from Bakersfield who'd lost her family farm to a fraudulent sale orchestrated by Marcus and Rebecca. She was living with her daughter now, sleeping on a sofa bed, trying to figure out how to survive on Social Security. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm so glad you called. I wanted you to know that they caught him. Marcus and Rebecca are both in jail, and they're going to stay there for a long time. Agent Chen told me about what you're doing with that property you own. About the money." Her voice broke. "Honey, I don't know how to thank you for that." "Mrs. Walsh, you don't need to thank me. You need to understand that what happened to you wasn't your fault. You trusted someone who seemed trustworthy, and he betrayed that trust. That says nothing about you and everything about him." We talked for 20 minutes. Dorothy told me about her late husband, about the farm they'd built together over 40 years, about how proud she'd been to own land that had been in her family for generations. She told me about the man who'd seemed so kind and professional, who'd convinced her that selling quickly was the best option for her financial future. She'd had no idea that the kind professional was my husband, using money stolen from my accounts to finance his approach to her. By the time we hung up, both of us were crying. But they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of recognition, of shared strength, of women who'd been knocked down but were getting back up. Over the next week, I spoke with all 17 victims. Each conversation was different, but each woman shared the same core experience: betrayal by someone they'd trusted, devastating financial losses, and the slow, difficult process of rebuilding their lives. Some of them were angry, righteously, appropriately angry. Others were embarrassed, still blaming themselves for being foolish enough to trust the wrong people. A few were simply tired, worn down by the stress of starting over later in life than anyone should have to. But all of them were survivors. All of them had found ways to keep going, to maintain their dignity, to build new lives from the wreckage of their old ones. And all of them deserved better than what Marcus and Rebecca had given them. The lake house sold for $2.4 million, even more than Linda had estimated. After legal fees and taxes, there was $2.1 million to distribute among the 17 victims. It wasn't enough to make any of them whole, but it was enough to give each of them a chance at financial stability. Dorothy Walsh used her portion to put a down payment on a small house near her daughter. The divorced teacher from Portland was able to replace her retirement savings and buy a condo. The widow from Fresno couldn't get her family farm back, but she could afford to move out of subsidized housing and into a place of her own. Justice, it turned out, wasn't just about sending Marcus and Rebecca to prison. Justice was about making sure their victims had the resources to rebuild their lives, to regain their independence, to move forward with dignity and hope. But there was one more piece of justice I needed to deliver personally. 2 weeks after the lake house closed, I got a call from Janet. Marcus wanted to see me. He was in federal detention, awaiting trial, and he'd asked if I would visit him. "Sarah, you don't have to do this," Janet said. "You don't owe him anything, especially not forgiveness or closure or whatever it is he's looking for." "I know I don't owe him anything," I replied. "But I want to see him. I want to look him in the eye and tell him exactly what his choices cost, not just me, but every woman he hurt." 3 days later, I was sitting across from Marcus in a federal detention facility, separated by reinforced glass and speaking through a phone that made everything sound tinny and distant. He looked smaller somehow. Older. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit that made his skin look sallow. His hair, which he'd been styling so carefully for his new life, was overgrown and unkempt. "Sarah," he said, and his voice was the same voice that had told me he loved me 1,000 times. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either. I need you to know that I never meant for it to go this far. When it started, it was just, we needed money, and the opportunity was there, and I thought I could pay it back before you ever knew it was gone." I stared at him through the glass, amazed by his ability to rewrite history even now. "Marcus, you stole from me for 2 years. You used my identity to fund crimes against 17 other women. You sold my house and left me homeless. At what point in that timeline were you planning to pay it back?" He looked down at his hands. "I know how it sounds. I know what I did was wrong. But Sarah, I want you to understand, I never stopped loving you. Rebecca, she was just business. A partner. You were always the one I really loved." The old Sarah might have found some comfort in those words. The old Sarah might have been tempted to believe that underneath all the lies and theft and betrayal, there had been real love. But the woman sitting in that chair wasn't the old Sarah. "Marcus," I said quietly, "if you had loved me, you wouldn't have stolen from me. If you had loved me, you wouldn't have lied to me every day for 2 years. If you had loved me, you wouldn't have destroyed my life to build a new one with someone else. I was trying to build a better life for both of us." "No." I cut him off. "You were building a better life for yourself, using money stolen from me and 16 other women. Don't you dare try to make this about love or us or anything other than what it actually was, greed and selfishness and complete disregard for anyone who got hurt along the way." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you go to prison for a very long time. The FBI found evidence of interstate fraud, conspiracy, identity theft, money laundering. You're looking at 25 years minimum, maybe more." "And Rebecca?" "Rebecca is going to prison too. And Marcus, I hope you both spend every single day of your sentences thinking about Dorothy Walsh, who lost the farm her family built over 4 generations. I hope you think about Linda Martinez, who lost her retirement savings and had to move back in with her adult children. I hope you think about all 17 women whose lives you destroyed for money." I stood up, preparing to leave. "But mostly, I hope you think about me. About the woman who loved you and trusted you and would have done anything for you. The woman you threw away for $200,000 and a redhead with flexible ethics." "Sarah, wait." I hung up the phone and walked away without looking back. As I drove home from the detention center, I felt something I'd never expected to feel after seeing Marcus again: peace. Not forgiveness. I wasn't ready for that. Might never be ready for that. But peace. The man I'd married had never really existed. The marriage I'd thought I was fighting for had been a lie from the beginning. And the life I'd thought I was losing had been built on foundations of deception and theft. But the life I was building now? That was real. That was mine. That was built on truth and strength and the kind of justice my grandmother would have been proud of. Marcus had tried to destroy me, and instead, he'd helped me discover exactly who I was capable of becoming. Clara Patterson's granddaughter. A woman who didn't lose. 6 months after Marcus's arrest, I was standing in the kitchen of my new apartment, making apple pie with Clara's recipe, when my phone rang with news that changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Agent Chen's voice was tight with excitement. "Sarah, we need to talk. Can you come to the field office this afternoon? There's been a development in your case that you need to know about." I drove to Sacramento with a mixture of curiosity and dread. Over the past months, I'd thought I'd learned everything there was to know about Marcus's crimes. The FBI had been thorough, the evidence overwhelming, the scope of the fraud operation comprehensive. What else could there possibly be? Agent Chen met me in the same conference room where I'd first learned about the other 17 victims. But this time, she wasn't alone. Agent Torres was there, along with David the forensic accountant and a woman I didn't recognize, a professional-looking blonde in her 40s wearing an expensive suit. "Sarah, this is Special Agent Patricia Reeves from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Unit in Las Vegas," Agent Chen said. She's been working on something related to your case, and what she's found is significant. Agent Reeves opened a laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was a photograph of Marcus and Rebecca, but they weren't alone. They were standing with a group of people I'd never seen before, all of them dressed formally, all of them holding champagne glasses and smiling at the camera like they were celebrating something. This photograph was taken 18 months ago at a conference in Las Vegas, Agent Reeves explained. It's a gathering of real estate professionals, but not the kind of real estate professionals you'd find at your typical industry event. She clicked to the next slide, and I felt my stomach drop. It was a program agenda for something called Alternative Property Acquisition Strategies, a 3-day seminar on creative financing solutions for challenging properties. Sarah, what we discovered is that Marcus and Rebecca weren't operating independently. They were part of a much larger network of criminals specializing in property fraud targeting vulnerable individuals. The room went quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. I stared at the screen, trying to process what Agent Reeves was telling me. How large are we talking about? Agent Reeves clicked through several more slides. Names, faces, locations, property records. 43 people across 7 states. Organized crime. Sarah. This wasn't just your husband having an affair and making bad financial decisions. This was a criminal enterprise that he joined, was trained by, and eventually became a leader in. Agent Chen leaned forward. The conference in Vegas? That was where new recruits learned the techniques. How to identify vulnerable targets, how to forge documents, how to manipulate title companies, how to create fake identities and business entities. Marcus wasn't just stealing from you, Agent Torres added. He was being coached by people who'd been running these scams for years. And once he proved himself successful, he started recruiting and training others. Agent Reeves pulled out a thick folder. Sarah, we need to ask you some questions about your marriage, about Marcus's behavior and activities going back several years. Because based on what we've found, his involvement with this organization predates your marriage. The words hit me like ice water. What do you mean, predates our marriage? We mean that Marcus Rodriguez may have targeted you specifically because of your family's property holdings. Agent Chen's expression was gentle but firm. Sarah, how did you and Marcus meet? I thought back 7 years, to a time that now seemed like ancient history. At a coffee shop near the school where I taught. He was there every morning when I stopped for coffee before work. We started talking, and I stopped, remembering details I'd forgotten, details that suddenly seemed important. He knew I was a teacher before I told him. He knew which school I worked at. He seemed to know a lot about me before we'd actually talked much. Agent Reeves was taking notes. Did he ever ask about your family? About property your family owned? About your grandmother specifically? Our second date. He asked about my family, and I mentioned that my grandmother owned some properties. I thought he was just making conversation, getting to know me. What did you tell him about the properties? Just that Grandma had a house in town where I grew up, and that she owned some land up north. I didn't know about the lake house then. I thought it was just vacant land. Agent Torres opened another file. Sarah, we've traced Marcus's activities back 8 years. He was already involved with this criminal organization when he met you. We believe you were specifically targeted because someone in the organization had identified Clara Patterson as a property owner worth investigating. The coffee shop. The morning routine. The charming man who seemed so interested in getting to know me. It had all been a lie from the very beginning. My entire marriage was a scam. We believe so, yes, Agent Reeves said quietly. Marcus was assigned to get close to you, marry you, gain access to your family's assets, and systematically steal everything over time. I sat there in that sterile conference room, staring at photographs of my husband with criminals I'd never heard of, processing the fact that every moment of my marriage, every kiss, every anniversary, every time he told me he loved me, had been part of an elaborate con game. If you've ever discovered that your entire life was built on lies, you know that there's a moment when reality just stops making sense. That's where I was, trying to reconcile the Marcus I'd loved with the Marcus who'd apparently been trained by professional criminals to destroy me. Agent Reeves, how many other women were targeted this way? How many other marriages were completely fake? We're still investigating, but we've identified at least 12 other cases where men associated with this organization married women specifically to gain access to family property or inheritance. 12 other women who'd lived the same lie I'd lived. 12 other women who'd thought they'd found love and instead found predators. What happens now? Agent Chen reopened her laptop. Now we expand the investigation. The charges against Marcus are going to be much more serious: racketeering, conspiracy to commit organized fraud, possibly even RICO violations. Instead of 25 years, he's looking at life in prison. And the other women? The ones whose husbands were part of this organization. We're working with local law enforcement in multiple states to build cases against all of them. Sarah, your cooperation with our investigation didn't just help us catch Marcus and Rebecca. It helped us uncover one of the largest property fraud operations in the country. Agent Reeves handed me a business card. We're going to need you to testify, potentially multiple times, in multiple states. Are you prepared for that? I looked at the card, thinking about Dorothy Walsh and the other 16 women whose lives had been destroyed by this organization. Thinking about the 12 other women who'd married criminals without knowing it. Thinking about all the future victims who could be saved if we dismantled this entire operation. Agent Reeves, I'll testify wherever you need me to testify. I'll tell my story as many times as it takes to make sure every single one of these criminals goes to prison. Over the next hour, the agents walked me through what they discovered about the organization's methods. It was sophisticated, well-funded, and had been operating for over a decade. They had trainers who taught new recruits how to assume false identities. They had contacts at banks, title companies, and government offices who provided inside information. They had lawyers who specialized in creating legitimate-looking but fraudulent documents. And they had a database of targets, women like me who owned valuable property, who lived alone or were recently divorced, who might be vulnerable to romantic manipulation. Sarah, Agent Chen said as we wrapped up the meeting, there's something else you should know. The lake house? Clara's property that Marcus tried to steal. What about it? It wasn't the first time they'd tried to get it. We found records showing that someone from this organization had been researching your grandmother's property for over 10 years, long before Marcus ever met you. 10 years. They'd been planning to steal my inheritance since I was still in college, since before I'd even known the lake house existed. They couldn't get to it directly because Clara was too smart, too careful with her legal documents, Agent Torres explained. So they decided to get to it through you. Through marriage. I thought about my grandmother, about her insistence on keeping the lake house under her maiden name, about her careful financial planning, about her decision to tell me about the property only in her final days. Clara Patterson had suspected something. Maybe not the full scope of the criminal organization, but she'd known enough to protect her assets in ways that made them difficult to steal. Agent Chen, I said, I want to see the files on all the other women. The ones whose husbands were part of this organization. I want to know their stories, and I want to help them however I can. Sarah, that's a generous offer, but you've already done more than enough. No, I haven't. These women are going through what I went through, but they don't have a lake house to sell. They don't have resources to rebuild their lives. And they deserve to know that they're not alone, that what happened to them was part of something bigger than individual betrayal. Agent Reeves nodded approvingly. We can arrange for you to speak with the other victims, if that's something you really want to do. But Sarah, you should know that some of these cases are difficult. Some of these women lost everything: children, homes, life savings, decades of their lives. Then they need help more than anyone. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the 7-year lie I'd called a marriage. About the man I'd loved who had never existed. About the criminal organization that had identified me as a target before I'd even met my own husband. It should have been devastating. It should have destroyed what little faith I had left in people, in love, in the possibility of trust. Instead, I felt something unexpected: gratitude. Gratitude that Clara Patterson had been smart enough to protect her assets in ways that ultimately saved my life. Gratitude that Marcus's greed had finally outweighed his patience, leading him to make the mistakes that got him caught. Gratitude that I'd discovered the truth while I was still young enough to rebuild my life on honest foundations. And gratitude that I'd become the kind of woman who could help other women find their way out of similar darkness. The old Sarah, the one who'd existed before that Tuesday afternoon phone call, would never have believed herself capable of taking on organized crime, of testifying against a criminal enterprise, of rebuilding her life from absolute zero. But Clara Patterson's granddaughter? She was just getting started. That night, I made a list of 12 names, the other women whose marriages had been criminal conspiracies. Tomorrow, I would start calling them. Tomorrow, I would begin the work of building a different kind of family, a family of survivors who refused to be victims. Tomorrow, I would continue my grandmother's legacy of taking care of people who needed help. But tonight, I was going to finish my apple pie and think about how grateful I was to be exactly who I'd become. 18 months after that life-changing Tuesday phone call, I was sitting in a federal courthouse in Sacramento, preparing to testify in what the media had dubbed the largest organized property fraud case in California history. The courtroom was packed with reporters, FBI agents, attorneys, and victims, so many victims that they'd had to set up an overflow viewing room. Marcus sat at the defendant's table in a gray suit that made him look like a stranger. He'd lost weight during his time in custody, and his hair was completely gray now. Rebecca was at another table with her own attorneys, and scattered throughout the courtroom were 41 other defendants, all part of the criminal organization that had destroyed hundreds of lives over more than a decade. The prosecution calls Sarah Morrison to the stand. As I walked to the witness box, I caught Marcus looking at me for the first time since that day in the detention center. There was something in his expression, regret, maybe, or fear about what I was going to say. But mostly, he just looked tired. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, she'd taken the case personally after learning that her own Aunt Dorothy was one of the victims, walked me through my testimony with professional precision. Mrs. Morrison, when did you first become aware that your husband was stealing from you? When he called me on October 15th at 2:47 p.m. and told me he'd sold my house and was leaving town with another woman. And what was your reaction to that phone call? I looked directly at the jury, 12 people who would decide whether Marcus and his co-conspirators spent the rest of their lives in prison. I was shocked, but not entirely surprised. I'd been sensing for months that something was wrong in our marriage, but I'd attributed it to normal relationship problems. I never imagined that my husband was actually a criminal who'd been trained to manipulate and rob me. Over the next 3 hours, I told my story in excruciating detail. The forged documents, the stolen identity, the fraudulent credit cards, the systematic emptying of our joint accounts. I explained how Marcus had used my grandmother's death as an opportunity to research my family's assets, how he planned to steal the lake house using the same methods he'd used on the Victorian house. But the most important part of my testimony wasn't about what Marcus had done to me. It was about what the criminal organization had done to dozens of other women. Mrs. Morrison, Attorney Walsh asked, after learning that your husband was part of a larger criminal enterprise, did you have contact with other victims? Yes. I've spoken with 4 to 7 women whose lives were destroyed by this organization. Some of them, like me, were married to men who specifically targeted them for their property. Others were widows or divorced women who were approached by criminals posing as legitimate real estate professionals. Can you tell the court about some of these women? I prepared for this question, but it was still difficult to answer without crying. Dorothy Walsh, age 73, lost her family farm that had been in her family for 4 generations. She's now living with her daughter, sleeping on a couch, trying to survive on Social Security. Linda Martinez, age 45, lost her house and her retirement savings. She had to move her 2 children back in with her parents and is working 3 jobs to try to rebuild her life. I looked directly at Marcus as I continued. Maria Santos, age 38, was married for 6 years to a man she thought loved her. He stole $400,000 from her accounts, sold her house, and disappeared. She found out later that his real name wasn't even James Santos, it was Michael Kellerman, and he was already married to another woman in Nevada. How many women were targeted through fake marriages? 17 that we know of. 17 women who thought they'd found love and instead found predators who'd been trained to identify them as valuable targets. The defense attorneys tried to paint me as a vindictive ex-wife seeking revenge, but their strategy backfired. Every question they asked gave me another opportunity to describe the scope of the organization's crimes, the sophisticated methods they used, and the devastating impact on victims. Mrs. Morrison, Marcus's attorney asked during cross-examination, "Isn't it true that you profited significantly from your husband's arrest? You sold property for over $2 million and received substantial media attention for your story." I looked at him calmly. "I sold my grandmother's lake house and gave every penny to the 47 victims your client helped destroy. I've made no money from this situation. I've lost my home, my savings, my marriage, and 2 years of my life helping the FBI build cases against the people who did this. But you must feel some satisfaction in seeing your ex-husband facing life in prison." "What I feel," I said, looking directly at the jury, "is satisfaction in knowing that this criminal organization can't hurt anyone else. What I feel is pride in being part of the investigation that prevented dozens of future victims from losing everything to these criminals." The trial lasted 6 weeks. One by one, the other victims testified about their experiences. Dorothy Walsh, now 75, told the court about losing the farm her grandfather had homesteaded in 1897. Linda Martinez described having to explain to her teenage children why they couldn't go back to their house, why mommy had to work nights and weekends, why everything they'd thought was secure had disappeared. The fake wives testified too. Maria Santos, whose husband Michael Kellerman had disappeared with $400,000 and her house, broke down crying as she described finding out that everything about her marriage had been a lie. Jennifer Huang told the court about discovering that the man she'd been married to for 4 years was already married to 2 other women in different states. By the time all the victims had testified, even the defense attorneys looked sick. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source, Rebecca Thornton herself. 3 days before closing arguments, Rebecca's attorney announced that his client wanted to cooperate with the prosecution in exchange for a reduced sentence. Rebecca took the stand and provided details about the organization that even the FBI hadn't discovered. "We had training manuals," she testified, her voice barely above a whisper. "Detailed instructions on how to identify vulnerable targets, how to research their assets, how to gain their trust. There were psychological profiles, financial analysis templates, even scripts for the kinds of conversations we should have to make targets feel comfortable." "Who created these materials?" Attorney Walsh asked. "The organization's leaders. People who'd been running these scams for 15, 20 years. They perfected the methods and were teaching them to new recruits like Marcus and me." Rebecca went on to explain how the organization recruited new members, how they laundered money through fake business entities, how they bribed officials at banks and title companies to facilitate fraudulent transactions. How many people were part of this organization? Over 100, across 10 states. Some of them were full-time criminals like Marcus and me. Others were part-time collaborators, bank employees who provided inside information, attorneys who created fake documents, real estate agents who helped manipulate property sales. And how many victims were there? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. "We kept records. Over 800 victims in 12 years. Total theft of approximately $180 million. The courtroom went completely silent. $180 million. 800 victims. 12 years of systematic, organized theft targeting the most vulnerable people in society. When Rebecca finished her testimony, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. Marcus hadn't just betrayed me personally. He'd been part of something much larger and more evil, a criminal enterprise that had destroyed hundreds of families, stolen generations of accumulated wealth, and left elderly people homeless and penniless in their final years. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned with their verdict, the foreman stood up and read the decision in a clear, strong voice that carried to every corner of the packed courtroom. On the count of conspiracy to commit racketeering, we find the defendant Marcus Rodriguez guilty. On the count of wire fraud, we find the defendant Marcus Rodriguez guilty. On the count of identity theft, we find the defendant Marcus Rodriguez guilty. The list went on for 20 minutes. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 43 defendants, hundreds of charges, and not a single acquittal. When it was over, Marcus was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Rebecca, because of her cooperation, received 15 years. The other defendants received sentences ranging from 10 to 40 years, depending on their roles in the organization. As the judge read Marcus's sentence, I felt something I hadn't expected: sadness. Not sadness for Marcus, he'd earned every year of his sentence. But sadness for the man I'd thought I'd married, the man who'd never actually existed. That evening, there was a reception for the victims and their families at a hotel near the courthouse. 47 women and their loved ones, sharing stories and supporting each other, celebrating not just the conviction but their own survival. Dorothy Walsh, now walking with a cane but still sharp as ever, pulled me aside. "Sarah, honey, I want you to know something. What you did, selling that property to help all of us, that wasn't just generous. That was justice. Real justice. Mrs. Walsh, you don't have to thank me. We were all victims of the same criminals." "No, dear. We were all victims, yes. But you were the one who figured out how to fight back. You were the one who turned the tables on them." She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Clara Patterson would be proud of the woman you've become." As I looked around the room that night, I saw something beautiful. I saw women who'd been knocked down but hadn't stayed down. I saw survivors who'd rebuilt their lives from nothing. I saw a community of people who understood that sometimes, when the system fails, you have to create your own justice. And I understood something about myself that I hadn't known before this all started. I wasn't just Clara Patterson's granddaughter by genetics. I was Clara Patterson's granddaughter by choice, by action, by the decision to take care of people who needed help. The old Sarah had died that Tuesday afternoon when Marcus called to tell me he'd stolen my life. But the woman who'd emerged from those ashes was someone I was proud to be. Someone who didn't lose. 2 years after Marcus Rodriguez was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison, I was standing in the kitchen of my new house, a modest 2-bedroom place in Davis, California, close to the school where I'd returned to teaching, when my phone buzzed with a text that made me smile. It was from Maria Santos, the woman whose fake husband had stolen $400,000 and disappeared. "Sarah, I got the keys today. My own place again. Thank you for everything." The attached photo showed Maria standing in front of a small blue house with a sold sign in the yard. She was holding her 8-year-old daughter, both of them grinning at the camera. It was the kind of photo that reminded me why I'd made every choice I'd made over the past 2 years. The Victim Compensation Fund from the lake house sale had helped 47 women rebuild their lives, but the work hadn't stopped there. What had started as a simple gesture of sharing my unexpected windfall had grown into something much larger. A non-profit organization called the Clara Patterson Foundation, dedicated to helping victims of financial fraud recover their lives and their dignity. We provided legal assistance, financial counseling, temporary housing, and something equally important, a community of survivors who understood what it meant to have your entire life stolen by someone you trusted. The foundation operated out of a converted warehouse in Sacramento, staffed by volunteers who were themselves survivors of financial fraud. Dorothy Walsh, despite being in her late 70s, had become our most effective counselor. Something about her combination of wisdom and righteous anger helped other victims find their own strength. "Sarah, you have a visitor," called Jennifer Martinez, Linda's oldest daughter, who now worked for us part-time while finishing her degree in social work. The foundation had become a family business of sorts, with survivors and their loved ones contributing whatever skills and time they could. I walked out to the reception area to find a woman in her early 30s with 2 small children clinging to her legs. She had the look I'd learned to recognize immediately, the shell-shocked expression of someone whose world had just collapsed. "Mrs. Morrison? I'm Amy Chen. The FBI gave me your number. They said you might be able to help me." Over the next hour, Amy told me a story I'd heard dozens of times by now, but which never got easier to listen to. Her husband of 5 years had disappeared 3 days ago, taking $85,000 from their joint accounts, their car, and every important document they owned. He'd left behind a note saying he'd found someone else and a house full of bills she didn't know existed. The FBI agent said David, my husband, he said David might be part of that same organization that your husband was involved with. They said there might be other victims. Amy, let me ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. When you met David, did he seem to know things about you before you told him? Did he ask a lot of questions about your family, your job, your finances? Amy's face went pale. He worked at the bank where I had my accounts. He said it was just a coincidence that he knew so much about me, that he'd noticed me coming in and had asked other employees about me. Bank employee. Inside information. Classic pattern. Amy, David didn't coincidentally notice you. You were targeted, researched, and systematically robbed by someone who was trained to do exactly what he did to you. But why me? I don't have much money. I don't own anything valuable. You had $85,000 in savings, which is more than most people your age. You have a stable job. You're a single mother who might be vulnerable to romantic manipulation. You were exactly the kind of target this organization looks for. I handed her a tissue and waited while she processed the information. There was always this moment with new victims, the moment when they stopped blaming themselves and started understanding that they'd been the target of a professional criminal operation. Mrs. Morrison, what do I do now? How do I rebuild from this? First, you file police reports. Then we help you freeze your credit, close any accounts David had access to, and start the process of documenting every theft. Then we help you find temporary housing, apply for emergency assistance, and connect with legal aid attorneys who understand financial fraud. And then you rebuild your life one day at a time, with the support of women who understand exactly what you're going through. That afternoon, I received a call that I'd been expecting for months. Marcus Rodriguez, calling collect from federal prison. Sarah, please don't hang up. I need to talk to you. I hadn't spoken to him since the day of his sentencing, when he tried one last time to convince me that what he'd done was somehow motivated by love. I'd thought I was done with Marcus Rodriguez forever. But Amy Chen's story had reminded me of something important. There were still victims out there who didn't know they were victims, still people being targeted by what remained of the criminal organization. What do you want, Marcus? I want to help. I know that sounds crazy, but Sarah, I've been thinking about what we did, about all the people we hurt, and I want to make it right. You want to make it right? Marcus, you destroyed hundreds of lives. You can't make that right. Maybe not completely. But I have information that could help the FBI find more victims, could help prevent future crimes. There are people still out there, still running scams, and I know who they are. I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Amy Chen and her 2 children, thinking about all the women who were probably being targeted right now by criminals Marcus had trained or worked with. What kind of information? Names, locations, methods they use that the FBI doesn't know about. Sarah, when I testified, I only told them about the people who'd already been arrested. There are others, people who got away, people who are still stealing from women like Amy Chen. How do you know about Amy? Because I trained the guy who stole from her. David Chen, that's not his real name, by the way. His real name is David Kowalski, and has been running the same scam in 3 different states using 3 different identities. My blood ran cold. Amy's husband wasn't just a criminal, he was a serial predator who was probably targeting other women right now. Marcus, if you really want to help, you need to call Agent Chen at the FBI. Tell her everything you know. All of it. I will. But Sarah, there's something else. Something I need you to know. What? When I was recruited into the organization, they showed me your file. Your picture, your family information, your job, your grandmother's properties. They told me you were a high-value target, that marrying you could set me up for life. I felt sick. I know that, Marcus. Agent Reeves told me that my marriage was part of the scam from the beginning. But what they didn't tell you, what I didn't realize until later, was that they'd been watching your family for 15 years. Not just your grandmother's properties, but your whole family. Your parents in Phoenix, your sister in Portland, they had files on all of you. 15 years. They'd been watching us since I was still in college. Marcus, what are you telling me? I'm telling you that when your parents sell their house and move to that retirement community, when your sister refinances her house, when any of your family makes financial moves, they might still be targets. The organization is smaller now, but it's not gone. After Marcus hung up, I immediately called Agent Chen. Sarah, we've been hoping Marcus would decide to cooperate more fully. What he told you about David Kowalski is accurate. We've been looking for him for months. Agent Chen, what Marcus said about my family still being targets, is that something I should be worried about? Unfortunately, yes. These criminal organizations keep extensive files on potential victims and their families. Even with most of the leadership in prison, there are still individual criminals out there who have access to that information. That evening, I called my parents in Phoenix and my sister in Portland. It was one of the most difficult conversations I'd ever had, explaining to the people I loved that they might be targets of criminals because of their relationship to me. Sarah, honey, my father said, you don't need to worry about us. We're old and suspicious of everyone anyway. Dad, I'm serious. These people are professionals. They're trained to seem trustworthy, to identify exactly what you need to hear to make you trust them. Then we'll be extra careful. And Sarah, I want you to know how proud your mother and I are of what you've done with this foundation. Clara would be proud too. My sister Jennifer was equally supportive but more worried. Sarah, what about my kids? Could they be targets someday? Probably not. The organization focused on adults with assets or inheritance potential. But Jen, just be careful about who you trust with financial information, okay? Over the next few weeks, Marcus provided information that led to the arrest of 12 more criminals, including David Kowalski, who was caught in the middle of defrauding a widow in Phoenix. The FBI estimated that his cooperation prevented at least 30 future victims from being targeted. It didn't make up for what he'd done. Nothing could make up for that. But it was something. 3 months later, I was invited to speak at a conference of victim advocates in Washington, D.C. As I stood at the podium looking out at an audience of people who dedicated their lives to helping crime victims, I thought about how far I'd come from that Tuesday afternoon when my world collapsed. When my husband called to tell me he'd sold my house and was leaving with another woman, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. My home, my marriage, my financial security, my faith in people. What I didn't realize was that losing everything I thought I wanted would teach me what I actually needed. I needed to understand my own strength. I needed to discover that I could rebuild my life on honest foundations. And I needed to learn that sometimes the most important thing you can do with your pain is use it to help other people heal from theirs. I talked about the Clara Patterson Foundation, about the 127 women we'd helped over the past 2 years, about the legislation we were supporting to make financial fraud harder to commit and easier to prosecute. But the most important thing I want to tell you today is this. Victims of financial fraud aren't just people who need financial assistance. They're people who need to remember their own worth, their own strength, their own capacity for building new lives. When someone steals your money, they're not just taking your assets. They're trying to steal your future, your independence, your sense of self-worth. Recovery isn't just about getting money back. It's about remembering who you are when everything external is stripped away. After my speech, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Morrison, I'm Rachel Stevens. 6 months ago, my boyfriend disappeared with $50,000 I'd saved for graduate school. I thought about suicide because I couldn't see how to rebuild from that. But watching your speech, I think I want to fight back instead. Rachel, fighting back is always better than giving up. But remember, fighting back doesn't mean revenge. It means reclaiming your power, rebuilding your life, and helping make sure other people don't go through what you went through. How do I start? I handed her my business card. You start by calling me tomorrow. You start by understanding that you're not alone. And you start by remembering that you're stronger than whoever tried to destroy you. As I flew back to California that night, I thought about the conversation I'd had with Marcus in prison, about the information he provided that helped arrest 12 more criminals. I thought about Amy Chen, who was now living in her own apartment and working toward a degree in criminal justice. I thought about Dorothy Walsh, who just celebrated her 77th birthday surrounded by her foundation family. And I thought about Clara Patterson, who died never knowing that her careful financial planning would save not just her granddaughter, but dozens of other women who needed someone to fight for them. Marcus had tried to steal my life, and instead, he'd helped me discover my purpose. He tried to make me powerless, and instead, he taught me exactly how powerful I could be. That was the final revenge, I realized. Not that Marcus was in prison, though he deserved to be there. Not that he'd lost everything, though justice demanded that he face consequences. The final revenge was that I was happier, stronger, and more fulfilled than I'd ever been when I was married to him. The final revenge was that his betrayal had led me to discover who I really was, and who I really was turned out to be someone pretty amazing. Clara Patterson's granddaughter. A woman who helped other women rebuild their lives. A woman who turned pain into purpose, who transformed betrayal into justice, who proved that sometimes the best response to being knocked down is to get up and start helping other people get up too. A woman who definitely didn't lose. As my plane descended towards Sacramento, I looked out the window at the city lights and smiled. Tomorrow, there would be more victims to help, more criminals to catch, more lives to rebuild. There would be Amy Chen's children learning that their mother was stronger than anyone who tried to hurt her. There would be Dorothy Walsh teaching other elderly victims that age was no barrier to fighting back. There would be Maria Santos finishing her nursing degree and buying that blue house she'd sent me pictures of. There would be justice, served not with coldness, but with warmth. Not with vengeance, but with healing. Not with hatred, but with the kind of love that Clara Patterson had taught me. The love that takes care of people who need help, that builds communities from broken pieces, that turns victims into warriors. That night, as I made apple pie in my kitchen using my grandmother's recipe, I said a prayer of gratitude. Not gratitude for what Marcus had done, I would never be grateful for that. But gratitude for who I'd become because of how I'd chosen to respond to what he'd done. And I made a promise to every woman who would walk into our foundation tomorrow, next week, next year. You are stronger than whoever tried to destroy you. You are worth more than whatever they stole from you. And you are not alone, because Clara Patterson's granddaughter and all the women she's learned to call family are going to make sure you remember exactly how powerful you really are. If you're watching this story and you're facing your own betrayal, your own loss, your own moment when everything you trusted turns out to be a lie, remember this: the person who tried to destroy you has no idea who you're capable of becoming. And check the description box below for more stories like this. Stories of people who refused to stay down, who turned their pain into power, who discovered that sometimes the best revenge is becoming someone you're proud to be. Because sometimes, when someone tries to destroy your life, the most powerful response is to build an even better one. The end.